Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel gave a speech at the United Nations today. All of our media covered it. Of course, Israel is a very important country in the world, and obviously to the United States as well. I've hardly seen any other country's leader get that kind of coverage where it's CNN, Fox, MSNBC, etc. And they're all, of course, incredibly respectful. I am not. He's a right-winger. I don't agree with right-wingers. I don't agree with them here in the United States, and I do not agree with them in Israel. I do not agree with them on a boat. I do not agree with them with a goat, okay? And Netanyahu is a neocon, a warmonger. So I particularly don't agree with that strain of right-winger. So he goes on and makes a speech that I found ridiculous in many different ways. Let's share it with you.
We won't solve our conflict with unilateral declarations of statehood. We have to sit together, negotiate together, and reach a mutual compromise in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the one and only Jewish state.
So two ironies there. First of all, he says, look, the Palestinians coming to the United Nations asking for statehood, unacceptable. And the reason it's unacceptable is because they have to recognize that we're the Jewish state. But wait a minute, you just said you wouldn't recognize them as a Palestinian state. So why do they have to respect you as a Jewish state? Now, my solution is, of course, you should both respect each other as states, as a Jewish state, the Palestinian state. But it's a ridiculous argument to make to say that you have to recognize me, but under no circumstances will I recognize you, nor should anyone else in the world. And then the second part of it is just assumed by the rest of the world. It's fine. But here is Netanyahu with an incredibly militarized state of Israel, and understandably so, and with nuclear weapons, giving a speech about how Iran cannot ever have nuclear weapons, and the Palestinians in this case have to be demilitarized. So, like, if an outside person looked in at that and they'd go, why? Well, I'm not sure that's fair. But we've all kind of gotten used to it, so we think like, well, of course, one side is not allowed to have any weapons, and the other side can have all the weapons in the world. Now, look, I don't want Hamas having weapons. I certainly don't want Iran having a nuke. There's already too many weapons in the Middle East. But nonetheless, the hypocrisy in those statements are a little glaring if you're actually objective about it. All right, he continues.
Shockingly, some people have begun to peddle the absurd notion that a nuclear-armed Iran would actually stabilize the Middle East. Yeah, right. That's like saying a nuclear-armed al-Qaeda would usher in an era of universal peace.
Now, again, here we have ironies. First of all, he set up a straw man. Some people are saying that it'd be great if Iran got nukes. Really? Who's saying that? Second of all, he says, oh, it'd be like al-Qaeda having it. No, it wouldn't. Iran is a state, and there's 70 million people in it, and they care about those 70 million people. Al-Qaeda is not a state, and they're very hard to hit. So they think they can hit you, and you're going to have trouble finding them, which turned out to be true. It took us about 10 years to get bin Laden, right? So it's very different factors and considerations that go into it. And then second of all, he says, oh my God, can you imagine if we had more nukes in the Middle East? But you have nukes in the Middle East. So if we can take everybody's nukes away, great, that's what I vote for, right? But again, here's a guy with nuclear weapons saying, can you imagine if we had nuclear weapons in the Middle East? Yeah, I can imagine it, because you already have them. Okay, so continues.
For nearly a decade, the international community has tried to stop the Iranian nuclear program with diplomacy. Well, that hasn't worked. Iran uses diplomatic negotiations as a means to buy time to advance its nuclear program. Sanctions have not stopped Iran's nuclear program either. There's only one way to peacefully prevent Iran from getting atomic bombs, and that's by placing a clear red line on Iran's nuclear weapons program.
Now we're getting Orwellian. There's only one way to peacefully stop them, by threatening all-out war against them and having a red line that if they cross it, we will actually give you war. I get it that the second part that he's talking about there is sometimes you have to bluff. You have to say, hey, listen, look, I'm going to come get you, so make sure you don't do that, right? But I don't think Netanyahu's bluffing. he's part of the same neocons, whether it's here in the U.S. or in Israel, who said about Saddam Hussein, oh my God, I'll tell you, don't worry, we're not going to use the force. We're just going to tell him there's a red line and he better not cross it. Oh, well, we think he crossed it. We're going to use it. I don't believe him. Continues.
Red lines don't lead to war. Red lines prevent war. It's the failure to place red lines that's often invited aggression. If the Western powers had drawn clear red lines during the 1930s, I believe they would have stopped Nazi aggression and World War II might have been avoided. In 1990, if Saddam Hussein had been clearly told that his conquest of Kuwait would cross a red line, the first Gulf War might have been avoided. Clear red lines have also worked with Iran. Earlier this year, Iran threatened to close the Straits of Hormuz. The United States drew a clear red line, and Iran backed off.
All right, so first a serious point, then a funny point. Okay, so he actually talked about Iraq there. He's like, oh man, remember when we drew the red line, or we should have drawn a red line in 1990. But wait a minute, you mentioned Iraq without mentioning the much bigger example. Remember when we drew the red line in the second Gulf War, and we thought, oh, Saddam Hussein crossed it. Whether he did or he didn't is irrelevant because it's the same neocons that Netanyahu is familiar with and in league with who said, oh, he crossed it, let's go to war, yeah. Well, you're just talking about how that would prevent war, but that's not what happened in Iraq. It caused the war, and totally unnecessarily. Now, here comes the funny part. As he keeps talking about red lines, did you notice that there's a red light blinking near him all the time? Like, apparently, that means likely that you're out of time. But you've crossed that red line anyway. So sometimes, apparently, red lines or flashing lights don't necessarily work. But here's where it's going to get really funny. Now he brings out a diagram. Uh-oh.
Brought a diagram for you. Here's a diagram.
Already failed.
This is a bomb. This is a fuse. In the case of Iran's nuclear plans to build a bomb, this bomb has to be filled with enough enriched uranium. Where's Iran? Iran's completed the first stage. Now they're well into the second stage. If these are the facts, and they are, where should a red line be drawn? A red line should be drawn right here.
Oh.
Before Iran completes the second stage of nuclear enrichment necessary to make a bomb.
Are you kidding me? Is that what a nuclear bomb looks like? As Ben Mankiewicz said earlier today on the TV show, he's like, well, if that's a nuclear bomb, you better make sure you got at least a 10-minute start before you light that fuse. Man, that was a nuclear bomb drawing fail, if I've ever seen one. God, you could need a better arts department than that. That didn't look like a nuclear bomb to me. But what's amazing is that he put up this next picture of Ahmadinejad, and I couldn't believe it. Really? I didn't think Ahmadinejad looked like that. And then he put up a picture of Israel, and he even went beep beep. Perhaps not, but he might as well have been just that silly.